My ex is my soulmate. You're just convenient. Those words hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday evening in October. I was standing in our kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly tasted like ash, watching Lena Morell, my girlfriend of 3 years, deliver what she probably thought was some profound revelation about authentic love. I'm Miles Harren, and I make my living capturing moments through a camera lens. I've photographed everything from corporate headshots to wedding ceremonies, and I've learned that the most devastating moments often come wrapped in the most ordinary packaging. This was one of those moments. Lena stood by our granite countertop, her auburn hair catching the overhead light, looking like she was auditioning for a role in some independent film about complicated relationships. She had that expression people get when they think they're being brutally honest. Chin slightly raised, eyes focused somewhere past my left shoulder. "Cedric and I reconnected last week," she continued, her voice taking on that breathless quality she used when discussing her latest yoga retreat or organic skincare routine. It was like finding a missing piece of myself. What we have, Miles, it's stable, it's comfortable, but it's not transcendent. I set my coffee cup down carefully on the counter. The ceramic made a small clicking sound against the granite. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, not heartbreak exactly, but something colder and more calculating. Transcendent, I repeated, tasting the word. That's an interesting choice. She nodded eagerly, apparently mistaking my calm tone for understanding. Exactly. You get it, right? I mean, we've built something solid together, but when I saw Cedric again— When exactly did you see Cedric again? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. I told you. Last week. We ran into each other at that coffee shop on Newberry Street. I nodded slowly. Lena had always been a good storyteller, but she had tells. The slight pause before answering. The way her left hand moved to touch her collarbone. I'd photographed enough people to recognize when someone was performing rather than simply being. So this transcendent reconnection happened over coffee, I said. It sounds silly when you put it like that, but yes, sometimes the universe just aligns things. She stepped closer, reaching for my hand. Miles, I hope you can understand. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't ignore what I feel. I looked down at her hand covering mine. Her engagement ring, the one I'd spent 2 months' income on, caught the light. She was still wearing it while telling me about her soulmate. The irony wasn't lost on me. You know what, Lena? I said, gently removing my hand from hers. I think you're absolutely right. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. This clearly wasn't the reaction she'd prepared for. If Cedric is your soulmate, I continued, then conveniently, I'm done. The words hung in the air between us. I could see her processing them, trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic or if this was some kind of reverse psychology play. Done? She repeated. Done. I walked past her toward the bedroom. I'll pack some things tonight and be out by tomorrow. You can have the apartment. Consider it my wedding gift to you and your soulmate. Miles, wait. Her voice had lost that dreamy quality and taken on a sharper edge. I didn't say I wanted you to leave. I was hoping we could talk about this like adults. I paused in the doorway and turned back to her. We just did. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in efficient relationship termination. While Lena alternated between confused silence and attempts at damage control, I systematically extracted myself from our shared life. First, I called our landlord and removed my name from the lease. Lena could handle the full rent herself or find a new place, preferably with her transcendent soulmate. Next, I went through our shared accounts. We'd kept most of our finances separate, thankfully, but there were a few joint credit cards and the shared streaming services. I methodically closed or transferred everything, leaving detailed notes about what belonged to whom. By midnight, I had 3 suitcases packed, and a storage unit rented for the furniture I'd brought into the relationship. Lena had retreated to the bedroom, occasionally emerging to watch me work with the kind of fascination people reserve for car accidents. "This is insane," she said as I loaded my camera equipment into protective cases. "You're acting like I cheated on you." I looked up at her. "Did you?" "Of course not. Cedric and I just talked. We haven't." She trailed off, apparently realizing that finishing that sentence wouldn't help her case. "Right," I said, returning to my packing. "Just talking. How transcendent." She tried a different approach. "Miles, I know this is hard to hear, but I thought you'd want me to be honest about my feelings." "I appreciate the honesty," I said, sealing the last camera case. "It makes this much simpler." I stood up and looked around the living room one final time. 3 years of shared meals, Netflix binges, and lazy Sunday mornings reduced to a pile of boxes and the faint scent of her vanilla candles. "I'll send you my forwarding address once I get settled," I told her, "for any mail that comes here." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere convenient," I said, shouldering my camera bag. As I reached for the door handle, she called out one last time, "Miles, please, can't we at least try to work through this?" I turned back to her, standing there in her living room, still wearing my ring, still looking like she was auditioning for that independent film. "Lena," I said, "you just told me that everything we built together was second best to a coffee shop reunion with your ex-boyfriend. What exactly is there to work through?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I was already closing the door behind me. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lighting. I stood there for a moment, 3 suitcases at my feet, camera bag over my shoulder, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely clear about what came next. Lena had her soulmate, and I had something better. I had the truth. I spent my first night of freedom at the Hampton Inn near my photography studio, lying on scratchy sheets and staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles. By morning, I'd made 2 decisions. First, I was going to rent the small apartment above my studio that I'd been using for storage. Second, I was going to change all my passwords and block Lena on every platform I could think of. The password changes were easy. The blocking proved to be more prescient than I'd realized. By the time I'd finished my first cup of coffee and checked my phone, Lena had already launched her social media campaign. Her Instagram story, posted at 6:47 a.m., featured a carefully composed shot of her hands wrapped around a coffee mug with text overlay that read, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go. Healing begins now." Her Facebook post was more detailed. "Friends, I wanted to share something personal with you all. After much soul-searching, I've made the difficult decision to end my relationship with Miles. While he's a good person, I realized I was staying for the wrong reasons: comfort, stability, fear of being alone. We both deserve partnerships built on genuine connection rather than convenience. I'm grateful for the lessons learned and wish him nothing but happiness. Please respect our privacy during this transition." I screenshot the post before taking a sip of coffee and considering my options. Lena had beaten me to the narrative, painting herself as the thoughtful party who'd made a mature decision about incompatibility. There was no mention of Cedric, no reference to soulmates or transcendence. Just a sanitized version of events that made her look introspective and me look, well, like someone who'd been left for the wrong reasons. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. "Dude, I'm so sorry," came the first text from my friend Jake. "Just saw Lena's post. You okay?" Then another from my sister Rena. "Call me when you're ready to talk. Bringing wine and takeout tonight." And another from Charlie, who owned the gallery where I occasionally showed my work. "Hey man, heard about you and Lena. Let me know if you need anything." Within an hour, I had 17 messages of condolence, 3 offers to set me up with someone's cousin, and 1 invitation to join a newly single guys poker game. The common thread was clear. Everyone assumed Lena had gracefully ended things with me, and I was the one nursing a broken heart. I was crafting a response to Jake when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Miles Harren Photography, I answered. Mr. Harren? This is Detective Walsh with the Boston Police. I'm calling about some concerns raised regarding unauthorized use of your photographic work. I nearly dropped my phone. I'm sorry, what? We've received reports that someone has been selling prints of your photographs without authorization. The complainant is a gallery owner in Cambridge who purchased what he believed were limited edition prints, only to discover later that you had no knowledge of the sale. My mind raced. Can you tell me which gallery? Morrison Contemporary on Brattle Street. The owner, David Morrison, says he purchased 3 prints for $8,000 each from a woman claiming to represent your studio. When he tried to contact you directly for additional pieces, he discovered the woman had provided false contact information. I sat down heavily in the hotel room's single chair. Can you describe this woman? Auburn hair, early 30s, said her name was Lena Mitchell. Claimed to be your business manager. Lena Mitchell. Close enough to her real name to feel natural when she said it, different enough to create plausible deniability if caught. And business manager, a role she'd never held, though she'd certainly been present for enough of my client meetings to understand the terminology. Detective Walsh, I said carefully, I think I know who you're looking for. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Detective Walsh's office, looking at photocopies of forged authentication certificates bearing my signature. The forgeries were good, better than good. Someone had clearly studied my actual signature and practiced extensively. These sales took place over the past 6 weeks, Detective Walsh explained, spreading the documents across his desk. Always the same pattern. The woman approaches smaller galleries, claims to have a limited number of prints available, provides these certificates, collects payment in cash, and disappears. How many galleries? 7 that we know of, probably more who haven't reported it yet. He leaned back in his chair. Mr. Harren, I have to ask, is there any chance this woman had legitimate access to your work? Any business relationship that might have given her the impression she could act on your behalf? I thought about Lena sitting in my studio while I worked, watching me sign actual certificates, listening to my phone calls with gallery owners. She'd been present for dozens of business transactions over the years, absorbing the language, the process, the relationships. She's my ex-girlfriend, I said. As of yesterday. Detective Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly. Recent development? Very recent. I pulled out my phone and showed him Lena's Facebook post. She announced this morning that she'd ended our relationship, didn't mention that she'd been committing fraud in my name for the past month and a half. Interesting timing. He made a note in his file. Mr. Harren, we're going to need you to file a formal complaint. This is wire fraud, forgery, and theft. Depending on the total amount involved, we could be looking at federal charges. As I filled out the paperwork, I found myself thinking about Lena's timeline. She'd said she reconnected with Cedric last week, but the first forged sale had taken place 6 weeks ago. Either she was lying about when the reunion happened, or she'd been planning her exit strategy for much longer than she'd admitted. I was signing the last form when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Just saw you're at the police station on your Instagram story. Everything okay? I looked at my phone, confused. I hadn't posted any Instagram stories. I opened the app and found that my account was still logged in on what must have been Lena's phone, something I'd forgotten about when I changed my passwords. But it wasn't my story that Jake had seen. It was Lena's. She'd posted a photo of the police station's exterior with the caption, "Sometimes you have to protect yourself from people who refuse to accept that it's over. Grateful for Boston PD's support during this difficult time." The implication was clear. I was some kind of stalker who'd forced her to seek police protection after she'd tried to end things gracefully. I showed the post to Detective Walsh, who studied it with the expression of someone who'd seen this particular game played before. "Mr. Harren," he said, "I'd recommend documenting everything from this point forward. Screenshots, recordings if legal, written records of any contact attempts. Something tells me this situation is going to get more complicated before it gets simpler." He was right. By the time I left the police station, Lena had posted 2 more stories, one showing her packing up painful reminders, a photo of what looked like my old sweatshirt, and another featuring a quote about healing from relationships with narcissistic partners. My phone was buzzing constantly now. Friends who'd seen her posts were reaching out with increasing concern, asking if I was okay, if I needed help, if there was anything they could do. The narrative was solidifying. Lena was a brave woman escaping a difficult relationship, and I was the unstable ex who couldn't accept rejection. I drove to my studio and let myself into the familiar space. The converted Victorian house had been my sanctuary for 5 years, filled with equipment I'd saved for, prints I was proud of, and the quiet satisfaction of work I loved. Now it felt like a crime scene. I walked through the space methodically, trying to figure out what else Lena might have had access to. Client files, pricing information, contact lists, upcoming projects. She'd been present for all of it, absorbing details that could be weaponized in ways I was only beginning to understand. My computer was password protected, but she'd watched me type the code hundreds of times. My filing cabinets were locked, but she knew where I kept the spare key. My backup drives were encrypted, but the passwords were written on a piece of paper taped to the bottom of my desk drawer, a security measure that had seemed clever until this moment. I spent the next 3 hours changing every password, moving every sensitive document, and installing new locks on everything that could be locked. Then I called Charlie at the gallery. "Miles, hey," he answered on the second ring. "I heard about you and Lena. How are you holding up?" "Charlie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone approached you about selling my work? Anyone claiming to represent me?" There was a pause. "Why do you ask?" "Just answer the question." Another pause. Longer this time. "Miles, I thought you knew. Lena came by about 3 weeks ago with some of your prints. Said you were testing a new distribution model, working with smaller galleries. I told her I wasn't interested. The pricing seemed off, and something about the whole thing felt wrong." "What kind of wrong?" She couldn't answer basic questions about the prints, when they were taken, what camera settings you used, whether there were other shots from the same session. It was like she was selling someone else's work. "Because she was," I said. I told Charlie about the police report, the forged certificates, the 7 galleries that had been scammed. By the time I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Miles," he said finally, "there's something else you should know. After Lena left that day, I called around to a few other gallery owners, just to see if anyone else had been approached. 2 of them said yes, but they'd turned her down for the same reasons I did. But here's the thing, she wasn't just selling your work." "What do you mean?" "She had prints from at least 3 other photographers, local guys, people whose work I recognize. She was running some kind of systematic operation." I closed my eyes and leaned against my desk. This wasn't just about me, or about our relationship, or even about her supposed soulmate reunion with Cedric. This was about money, and it had been going on for weeks before she'd ever mentioned transcendence or authentic connection. "Charlie," I said, "I need you to do me a favor. Can you reach out to those other photographers? Let them know what's been happening? They might want to check with galleries in their areas, see if anyone's been selling their work." "Already on it," he said. "Miles, I'm sorry. I should have called you when she first showed up." "You couldn't have known." "Maybe, but I've been in this business long enough to recognize when something smells wrong, and this whole thing has been smelling wrong for weeks." After I hung up, I sat in my studio and tried to piece together the timeline. 6 weeks ago, Lena had started forging my signature and selling unauthorized prints. 3 weeks ago, she'd expanded the operation to include other photographers. Last week, according to her story, she'd randomly encountered Cedric and discovered their transcendent connection. But what if the encounter wasn't random? What if she'd been planning her exit from our relationship for weeks, stockpiling money and preparing her next move? The Soulmate story was just the narrative she'd chosen to make herself look sympathetic rather than calculating. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Cedric Fallon. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment. Lena's transcendent soulmate wanted to have a conversation. This was either going to be very interesting or very unpleasant. Possibly both. I typed back, "I'm listening." His response came immediately. Not over text. "Meet me at the Starbucks on Newberry Street. 1 hour." The same coffee shop where Lena claimed they'd had their chance reunion. The irony was almost poetic. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but not before enabling the recording app on my phone. Detective Walsh had said to document everything. Something told me I was about to get plenty to document. Cedric Fallon looked exactly like the kind of man who would use the word transcendent in casual conversation. He was sitting at a corner table in the Starbucks, wearing a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, scrolling through his phone with the practiced indifference of someone accustomed to being waited for. I recognized him immediately from Lena's old photos, the ones she'd claimed were just memories when I'd found them in her jewelry box 2 years ago. Tall, lean, with the kind of angular features that photographed well and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He looked up as I approached, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Exhaustion. "Miles," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Thanks for coming." "Cedric." I sat down across from him, noting that he'd already ordered a venti something with extra shots and what looked like oat milk. Interesting choice of location. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Yeah, about that. Lena's version of events isn't exactly complete." I'm shocked. He studied my face, apparently trying to gauge my mood. "Look, I'm not sure what she told you about us reconnecting, but I thought you should know the truth. I'm all ears." Cedric pulled out his phone and scrolled to his call log, then turned the screen toward me. "This is from 4 months ago, the first time Lena called me." I looked at the screen. August 15th, 7:23 p.m., duration 47 minutes. Today was December 12th. "She said you two had been having problems," he continued, "that you were emotionally unavailable, that she felt trapped in a relationship with no future. She wanted to meet for coffee just to catch up, maybe get some perspective from an old friend." "And you said yes?" I said yes. He put the phone away and met my eyes. "Miles, I'm not proud of this, but Lena and I have history. We dated for 2 years in college, and when she called, I was curious. Curious enough to meet with someone else's girlfriend. Curious enough to meet with someone who said she was unhappy." His voice carried a defensive edge. "She made it sound like you two were basically roommates at this point." I thought about the past 4 months, trying to remember signs of unhappiness. There had been some tension, sure. Lena had seemed distracted, more critical of small things, less interested in our usual routines. But I'd attributed it to work stress, or the approaching holidays, or just the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. "So you met for coffee," I said. "We met for coffee. Several times, actually." He shifted in his chair. "She was persuasive, made it sound like your relationship was essentially over, that you were both just going through the motions. She said she was planning to end things, but wanted to make sure she was making the right decision. And you helped her make that decision. I thought I was helping her find clarity." He paused. "Miles, I need you to understand something. Lena told me you two hadn't been intimate in months, that you barely talked anymore, that you'd essentially become strangers living in the same apartment. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. None of that was true. We'd made love just 3 days before her Soulmate speech. We'd spent the previous weekend planning a trip to Vermont for the holidays. We'd had dinner together every night that week, talking about everything from my latest photography project to her ideas for redecorating the bathroom. That's an interesting interpretation of our relationship, I said carefully. Cedric's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? I mean that as recently as last Sunday, Lena was talking about our Christmas plans. She wanted to drive up to Vermont, stay at that bed and breakfast in Stowe, maybe do some skiing. We'd already made reservations. Christmas plans? He looked genuinely confused. She told me she was planning to end things with you before Thanksgiving. Said she didn't want to drag it out through the holidays. We stared at each other across the small table, two men who were apparently dating the same woman under completely different sets of assumptions. Cedric, I said slowly, when exactly did Lena tell you she'd broken up with me? Yesterday morning. She called around 9, said she'd finally had the conversation with you, that you'd taken it better than expected. He paused. She said you were relieved, actually, that you'd admitted you'd been feeling the same way but hadn't known how to bring it up. I almost laughed. And what was your reaction to this news? For the first time since I'd sat down, Cedric looked genuinely uncomfortable. I was happy for her. For both of you, actually. It seemed like the mature way to handle things. And then? And then she said she wanted to take things slow, that she needed time to process the end of a 3-year relationship before jumping into something new. He ran a hand through his hair. Which made sense, you know? I respected that. So you haven't seen her since yesterday morning? No. We were supposed to have dinner tonight, actually. She said she wanted to celebrate her newfound freedom. He looked at me more closely. Why? Is there something I should know? I pulled out my phone and showed him Lena's Instagram stories from the morning, the coffee mug photo, the police station, the quotes about narcissistic partners. Cedric scrolled through them with increasing bewilderment. What is this supposed to mean? According to social media, I'm a stalker who can't accept rejection. She's at the police station seeking protection from my inability to respect her boundaries. But, he looked up from the phone. You're sitting here having coffee with me. You seem completely rational. That's because I am completely rational. The police station visit was because I was filing a fraud complaint against her. I told him about the forged prints, the 7 galleries, the systematic operation that had been running for weeks before her supposed moment of clarity about our relationship. I watched his expression change from confusion to concern to something approaching alarm. She's been selling your work without permission? Among other things. I leaned forward. Cedric, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Has Lena ever asked you for money? Money? No, never. He shook his head. She's always been very independent about that stuff. Even in college, she insisted on paying her own way. What about information? About your work, your business, your connections? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. She's asked some questions about my company. What we do, who our clients are, what kinds of investments we handle. But that seemed natural. She was interested in my life. What kind of company do you work for? Private equity. We handle investments for high net worth individuals, some corporate clients. Nothing too exciting, really. He paused. Why? Just trying to understand the full picture. I sat back in my chair. Cedric, I think you and I have been played. What do you mean? I mean Lena has been running some kind of long-term operation. The fraud started 6 weeks ago. She contacted you 4 months ago. She's been systematically extracting information from both of us while planning her exit strategy from our relationship. He stared at me for a long moment. That's pretty paranoid, don't you think? Is it? You just told me she's been lying to you about our relationship for months. She told me your reunion was a chance encounter last week, but you've been talking for 4 months. She's been forging my signature and stealing from galleries while playing the role of devoted girlfriend. What part of this seems honest to you? Cedric was quiet, turning his coffee cup in small circles on the table. Finally, he looked up at me. There's something else, he said. Something I didn't mention before. I'm listening. Last week, Lena asked me about our client confidentiality policies. Specifically, she wanted to know whether information about our investors was protected, or if there were circumstances where it might become public. Why would she want to know that? She said she was thinking about applying for a job in finance, wanted to understand the industry better. He met my eyes. But now that I think about it, she also asked about our security protocols, how we protect client data, what kinds of background checks we run on employees, whether we monitor communications. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Cedric, what kind of information does your company handle? Investment portfolios, tax strategies, offshore accounts, estate planning. He was starting to look pale. Some of our clients are very private people, politicians, celebrities, business executives who prefer to keep their financial arrangements confidential. The kind of information that might be valuable to the wrong people. Very valuable. He pulled out his phone. I need to make some calls. Wait. I put my hand on his arm. Before you do that, I think we should talk about what we're going to do about Lena. What do you mean? I mean, she's been lying to both of us for months. She's committed fraud in my name and possibly been gathering intelligence about your business. She's manipulated our emotions and our trust for her own purposes. I leaned forward. The question is, are we going to let her get away with it? Cedric looked at me for a long moment. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Lena thinks she's smarter than both of us. She thinks she can play us against each other while she moves on to whatever her next scheme is. I smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. I think it's time to show her how wrong she is. You want to work together. I want to get the truth, all of it, and I want to make sure she faces consequences for what she's done. I pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. The question is, are you interested in justice, or are you still hoping for transcendence? Cedric picked up the card and studied it for a moment. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper. What did you have in mind? The next morning I woke up in my studio apartment with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Cedric and I had spent 3 hours the previous evening comparing notes, and the picture that emerged was both more complex and more damning than either of us had initially realized. Lena hadn't just been planning to leave me for Cedric. She'd been conducting what amounted to a months-long intelligence operation, gathering information from both of us while systematically stealing from my business and potentially compromising his. My phone buzzed with a text from Cedric. Spoke with our security team. They want to meet with you today. Can you come to our office at 2 p.m.? I texted back, I'll be there. But first, I had other business to attend to. Charlie had been busy overnight. He'd reached out to the other photographers whose work Lena had been selling, and by morning, I had a list of 5 names and phone numbers. The first call was to Marcus, a landscape photographer whose work I'd always admired. Miles, thanks for the heads up, he said when I explained the situation. I've been wondering about some irregularities in my sales tracking. Had a couple of galleries mention they'd purchased prints I didn't remember selling. How many galleries? 3, maybe 4. I thought it was just poor record-keeping on my part. He paused. You said the woman's name was Lena Mitchell? That's the alias she used. Her real name is Lena Morell. Can you send me a photo? I want to see if she matches the description I got from one of the gallery owners. I sent him a screenshot from Lena's Instagram, then called the next photographer on the list. Same story, unauthorized sales, confused gallery owners, missing documentation. By the time I'd spoken with all 5 photographers, we'd identified at least 15 galleries that had been targeted. The scope of the operation was staggering. Lena had been systematically defrauding the entire Boston art community, using her access to my studio and her knowledge of the business to run a sophisticated forgery scheme. But that was just the beginning. At 2 p.m., I found myself in the sleek downtown offices of Fallon and Associates, sitting in a conference room with Cedric and 2 men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as the company's head of security and general counsel. "Mr. Harren," the security chief said, "Cedric has filled us in on the basics of your situation. We're concerned that Ms. Morel may have been attempting to gather confidential information about our clients and operations." "What kind of information?" The general counsel slid a folder across the table. "These are logs of Cedric's computer access over the past 4 months. We monitor all employee activity for security purposes." I opened the folder and found myself looking at pages of data, login times, files accessed, emails sent, websites visited. Most of it meant nothing to me, but certain entries were highlighted in yellow. "These highlighted entries," the security chief explained, "represent unusual activity. Files accessed outside of normal business hours, client records reviewed without corresponding work assignments, searches for information that wouldn't typically be relevant to Cedric's role." I looked at Cedric. "You accessed all these files?" "No," he said quietly. "I mean, some of them, yes, but not all of them, and definitely not at these times." He pointed to several entries. "These are all from evenings when I was with Lena. We were usually at dinner, or at her place, or she was at your place," I finished. "She was at my place." He looked sick. "She said she wanted to understand my work better, asked if she could use my laptop to look up some basic information about private equity. I thought it was sweet that she was taking an interest." The general counsel leaned forward. "Mr. Harren, we need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. Some of the files that were accessed contain extremely sensitive information. Client identities, investment strategies, offshore account structures. If this information were to be sold to the wrong parties." "What kind of wrong parties?" "Journalists investigating tax avoidance, regulatory agencies building cases against our clients, competing investment firms looking for insider information." He paused. "Or blackmailers." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Blackmail. It hadn't occurred to me that Lena's activities might extend beyond simple fraud. "Has anyone contacted your clients?" I asked. "Any unusual inquiries or demands?" "Not yet," the security chief said. "But that doesn't mean they won't. This kind of information has a long shelf life." Cedric was staring at the computer logs with the expression of someone watching his career implode in real time. "How much trouble am I in?" "That depends," the general counsel said, "on whether we can prove you weren't complicit in the breach." "He wasn't," I said. "Lena manipulated him the same way she manipulated me. The only difference is that she stole art from me and intelligence from him." "Can you prove that?" I thought about the question. Could I prove Lena's manipulation? Could I demonstrate that both Cedric and I had been victims rather than accomplices? "Maybe," I said, "but I'm going to need your help." The security chief raised an eyebrow. "What kind of help?" "I need to know everything Lena accessed, everyone she might have information about, and every way she might try to use what she's learned." I looked around the table. "And then I need you to help me catch her in the act." "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we set a trap, use Cedric as bait, give Lena an opportunity to make her next move, and document everything when she does." The general counsel and security chief exchanged glances. "That's risky." "It's also the only way to prove that Cedric was a victim rather than a conspirator, and it's the only way to find out what Lena's real endgame is." Cedric looked up from the computer logs. "What would I have to do?" "Contact her. Tell her you've been thinking about what she said, that you want to move forward with your relationship. Arrange to meet her, but this time, we'll be ready." Ready how? I smiled. Remember, I'm a photographer. I'm very good at capturing moments people would prefer to keep private. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, we had a plan. Cedric would reach out to Lena and suggest they meet for dinner. He'd tell her he'd been thinking about their future together, that he wanted to discuss some exciting opportunities that had come up at work. He'd make it sound like he was willing to share confidential information, the kind of information she'd been trying to gather for months. Meanwhile, I would be documenting everything. Audio recordings of their conversations, photographs of any documents she might try to access, video of any suspicious behavior. We'd build a case that would not only clear Cedric of wrongdoing, but also provide law enforcement with everything they needed to prosecute Lena for fraud, theft, and potentially espionage. It was a risky plan. If Lena suspected a trap, she might disappear entirely, taking whatever information she'd already gathered and leaving us with no way to prove our innocence or recover what she'd stolen. But it was also the only plan that offered the possibility of complete vindication. As I left the office building, my phone buzzed with a notification. Lena had posted another Instagram story, a photo of herself looking contemplative with text that read, "Sometimes the universe closes one door to open another. Grateful for new beginnings." New beginnings. I wondered if she had any idea how her new beginning was about to collide with my desire for an ending. I called Cedric as I walked to my car. "Are you ready for this?" I asked when he answered. "No," he said, "but I'm angry enough to do it anyway." "Good. Anger is useful. Just remember, we're not trying to hurt her. We're trying to expose her." "What's the difference?" I thought about that question as I drove back to my studio. What was the difference between hurting someone and exposing them? Was there a moral distinction between revenge and justice? Maybe the difference was in the method. Lena had used lies, manipulation, and theft to get what she wanted. We were going to use the truth. That evening, I sat in my studio and prepared for what was coming. I charged my cameras, tested my recording equipment, and reviewed the plan we'd developed. Everything had to be perfect. We'd only get one chance to catch Lena in the act. My phone buzzed with a text from Cedric. "Message sent. She wants to meet tomorrow night." I texted back, "Game time." But as I sat there in the quiet of my studio, surrounded by the tools of my trade, I found myself thinking about something Detective Walsh had said. Document everything. Something tells me this situation is going to get more complicated before it gets simpler. He'd been right about the complications. I just hoped he was wrong about how much more complicated things could get. The restaurant Cedric had chosen was perfect for our purposes. Dim lighting, secluded booths, and a layout that allowed me to position myself at the bar with a clear view of their table while remaining unnoticed. I'd arrived an hour early, claiming a corner stool and nursing a whiskey while I tested my equipment. The audio recorder in my jacket pocket was military grade, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from 30 feet away. The camera hidden in my phone case was equally sophisticated, capable of capturing high-resolution video without anyone realizing they were being filmed. I felt like a private investigator in a noir novel, except the stakes were entirely real. Cedric arrived first, looking nervous but determined. He'd dressed carefully, expensive but not flashy, confident but approachable, the kind of outfit that suggested success without arrogance. He ordered a bottle of wine and checked his phone repeatedly, playing the part of an eager suitor perfectly. Lena appeared 15 minutes later, and I had to admit she looked stunning. She'd chosen a black dress that was elegant without being provocative, and her hair was styled in loose waves that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. She moved through the dining room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing every eye was on her. I watched through my phone's camera as she approached Cedric's table, noting the way she paused for just a moment before sitting down. Long enough for him to stand and kiss her cheek, long enough for anyone watching to see that this was a romantic reunion rather than a business meeting. "Cedric," I heard her say as she settled into the booth, "you look wonderful. I've missed you." I've missed you too, he replied, and I had to give him credit. He sounded completely sincere. How are you holding up? I know this week has been difficult. It has been, she said, accepting the glass of wine he poured for her. But I feel like I can finally breathe again, you know? Like I've been holding my breath for months and can finally exhale. I zoomed in with my camera, capturing the expression on her face. She looked genuinely relieved, genuinely happy. If I didn't know better, I might have believed she was simply a woman who'd escaped an unhappy relationship. I'm glad you're feeling better, Cedric said. I have to admit, I was worried about how Miles would take things. Oh, he's been challenging. Lena's voice took on a slightly strained quality. He's having trouble accepting that it's really over. I had to go to the police yesterday. The police? Cedric managed to sound appropriately concerned. Lena, that's serious. What happened? He showed up at my apartment demanding to talk. When I told him I didn't want to see him, he became aggressive. Started making threats about ruining my reputation, claiming I'd stolen from him. She shook her head sadly. I think he's having some kind of breakdown. I gripped my whiskey glass tighter, fighting the urge to march over to their table and confront her lies directly. But that wasn't the plan. The plan required patience. That doesn't sound like the Miles you described to me, Cedric said carefully. You always said he was emotionally distant but not aggressive. People can surprise you when they're hurt, Lena replied. I think he's realized what he lost and can't handle it. What kind of threats did he make? Lena glanced around the restaurant as if checking to make sure they weren't being overheard. He claimed I'd been selling his photographs without permission. Complete nonsense, of course. I helped him with some sales over the years, but everything was legitimate. Did you tell the police that? Of course. They were very understanding. They said it sounds like a civil matter rather than a criminal one, but they're keeping a record in case his behavior escalates. I had to admire her technique. She was weaving just enough truth into her lies to make them plausible, while positioning herself as the victim of my supposed instability. I'm sorry you're going through this, Cedric said. Is there anything I can do to help? Actually, Lena said, leaning forward slightly, there might be. But I don't want you to feel like I'm using you. Using me how? Well, Miles knows some people in the art world. Gallery owners, collectors, other photographers. If he really is planning to damage my reputation, he could make it very difficult for me to find work in Boston. What are you thinking? I might need to leave the city for a while. Start fresh somewhere else. She reached across the table and touched his hand. I know we just reconnected, and I know this is terrible timing, but I was wondering, do you ever travel for work? Are there opportunities in other cities where someone with my background might be useful? And there it was, the real reason for the dinner, delivered with perfect timing and flawless emotional manipulation. Lena wasn't just looking for a new relationship, she was looking for a new base of operations. What kind of opportunities? Cedric asked. I have experience with sales, client relations, administrative support. I'm good with people, good with details. She paused. And I'm very discreet. Discreet? I understand that your business involves confidential information. I would never do anything to compromise that. She smiled. I know how to keep secrets. I zoomed in on her face as she said this, capturing the expression that accompanied her promise of discretion. To anyone watching, she would look sincere, trustworthy. But knowing what I knew about her activities over the past months, her words carried an entirely different meaning. That's very thoughtful of you, Cedric said. There might be some possibilities. We have offices in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and we're always looking for people who understand the importance of confidentiality. Really? Lena's eyes lit up. What would that kind of position involve? Client support mostly. Maintaining relationships, handling sensitive communications, ensuring that information stays within appropriate channels. He paused. It would require a thorough background check, of course. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across Lena's face, a brief shadow of concern, but it passed quickly, replaced by her practiced smile. "Of course," she said. "I would expect nothing less from a company like yours." They continued talking for another hour, with Cedric gradually revealing more details about his company's operations, while Lena asked increasingly specific questions. She wanted to know about client lists, security protocols, information management systems, all perfectly reasonable questions for someone considering a job in the industry, but I could see the pattern. As the evening progressed, Lena became more relaxed, more open. She talked about her plans for the future, her desire to build something meaningful with Cedric, her relief at finally being free from what she called a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. "I feel like I can finally be myself again," she said as they finished the bottle of wine. "Do you know what I mean?" "I think so," Cedric replied. "It's like you've been playing a role for so long that you forgot who you really were." "Exactly." She leaned back in the booth, looking more content than I'd seen her in months. "Miles wanted me to be this perfect, supportive girlfriend who never questioned anything, never had ambitions of my own. It was exhausting." I almost laughed out loud. In 3 years together, I'd never once asked Lena to suppress her ambitions. If anything, I'd encouraged her to pursue her interests, offered to support her career changes, suggested she take classes or start her own business. But apparently, in her revised history, I'd been a controlling partner who'd held her back. "Well, you don't have to play that role anymore," Cedric said. "You can be exactly who you want to be." "Who I want to be," she repeated thoughtfully. "I like the sound of that." As they prepared to leave, Lena excused herself to use the restroom. I watched Cedric pull out his phone and send a quick text, our agreed-upon signal that the evening had gone according to plan. When Lena returned, they gathered their coats and headed for the exit. I waited until they were outside before following, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection while keeping them in sight. They paused on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, and I positioned myself behind a parked car where I could continue recording their conversation. "Thank you for tonight," Lena said, moving closer to Cedric. "I really needed this." "So did I," he replied. "Lena, I want you to know, whatever happens with work, whatever you decide to do about leaving Boston, I want to be part of your life." "Are you sure? Even with all the complications?" "Especially with all the complications." He kissed her gently. "We'll figure it out together." They separated, with Lena heading toward her car and Cedric walking in the opposite direction toward the parking garage. I waited until both of them were out of sight before emerging from my hiding spot. My phone buzzed with a text from Cedric. "How did we do?" I typed back, "Perfect. We got everything we needed." But as I walked back to my own car, I found myself thinking about something Lena had said. "I feel like I can finally be myself again." The question was, who was her real self? Was she the woman I'd lived with for 3 years, who'd seemed to genuinely care about our relationship and our future together? Or was she the calculating manipulator who'd been systematically defrauding the art community while gathering intelligence on Cedric's clients? Maybe the truth was that both versions were real. Maybe Lena was capable of genuine emotion and calculated manipulation at the same time. Maybe she'd convinced herself that her lies were justified, that her victims deserved what they got. Or maybe she was just very, very good at playing whatever role the situation required. Either way, we now had evidence of her intentions. The recordings from tonight, combined with the documentation from her fraud operation and the computer logs from Cedric's office, painted a clear picture of someone who was willing to use any means necessary to get what she wanted. The question now was, what were we going to do with that evidence? I had some ideas about that, and I didn't think Lena was going to like any of them. 3 days after the restaurant meeting, everything started falling apart for Lena, and this time, It wasn't by accident. I'd spent those 3 days working with Detective Walsh, Cedric's security team, and the other photographers who'd been victimized by her fraud scheme. We'd assembled a comprehensive case file that included audio recordings, financial records, computer logs, and testimony from more than a dozen gallery owners who'd been scammed. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We were going to give Lena exactly what she'd asked for, and then watch her destroy herself with it. Cedric called her Thursday morning with exciting news. His company had an immediate opening in their Miami office, a client relations position that would be perfect for someone with her skills. The salary was generous, the benefits were excellent, and they were willing to expedite the hiring process if she was interested. There was just one catch. She'd need to start immediately. As in, this weekend. "I know it's sudden," Cedric told her over the phone, his conversation being recorded by both the FBI and his company's security team. "But our Miami manager just lost his assistant to a family emergency. They need someone who can handle sensitive client information and maintain absolute discretion." "This weekend?" Lena's voice carried a note of excitement mixed with concern. "Cedric, that's wonderful, but I'd need time to pack, to arrange for movers, to—" "The company will handle all of that. They'll pay for your relocation, set you up in a temporary apartment, even arrange for storage of anything you can't bring immediately." He paused. "Lena, this is the kind of opportunity that could change your life." "What about the background check you mentioned?" "They're willing to waive the full investigation for now, given the urgent circumstances and my personal recommendation. You'd need to fill out some basic paperwork, but nothing too invasive." I had to give Lena credit. She was smart enough to be suspicious. "This seems almost too good to be true." "I know it does, but sometimes the universe just aligns things perfectly." He was using her own language against her, and from the recording, I could hear her responding to it. "Lena, I think this could be our chance to start fresh together. No complications from your past with Miles, no pressure from people who knew you before, just us, building something new." The hook was set. Lena agreed to meet Cedric at his office Friday afternoon to fill out the paperwork and discuss the details. She'd bring her identification, her resume, and any other documents they might need for the hiring process. What she didn't know was that we'd be ready for her. Friday afternoon, I positioned myself in the office building's lobby, camera equipment disguised as a laptop bag, audio recording devices hidden in my jacket. Cedric's security team had installed additional cameras in the conference room where the meeting would take place, and Detective Walsh was stationed in a nearby office with a warrant for Lena's arrest on fraud charges. The plan was to let her incriminate herself as thoroughly as possible before moving in. Lena arrived exactly on time, dressed professionally and carrying a leather portfolio that probably contained her fake resume and forged references. She looked confident, excited, like someone about to embark on a new adventure. I watched from across the lobby as Cedric met her at the elevators, kissing her cheek and leading her toward the bank of offices where his company occupied 3 floors. They looked like any other professional couple discussing a career opportunity. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Cedric. "She's asking about client lists." The meeting was taking place in a conference room equipped with hidden cameras, but I was receiving real-time updates through a secure messaging system. According to Cedric's reports, Lena was being more aggressive than expected in her attempts to gather information. "She wants to know about offshore accounts," came the next message. "She's asking about security protocols. She wants copies of client files to prepare for her new role." Each request was being documented, recorded, and preserved as evidence. Lena was walking directly into a trap of her own making, driven by greed and overconfidence. The final message came 45 minutes after the meeting had started. "She's accessing my computer. Moving in now." I made my way to the elevators, timing my arrival to coincide with what we'd planned as the climactic moment of our operation. As the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, I could hear raised voices coming from the conference room. told you this was legitimate, Lena was saying, her voice carrying a note of panic I'd never heard before. Accessing confidential client files without authorization is a federal offense, came a voice I didn't recognize. Probably the FBI agent who'd been coordinating with Detective Walsh. I was told to review the materials. Cedric said it was part of the hiring process. Ms. Morell, Detective Walsh's familiar voice cut through the confusion. You're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. I walked down the hallway and positioned myself where I could see into the conference room through the open door. Lena was standing next to Cedric's laptop, a USB drive in her hand, and an expression of absolute shock on her face. Detective Walsh was reading her rights while an FBI agent documented the computer screen, which displayed what looked like confidential client financial records. Cedric was standing against the far wall, looking sick but determined. When he saw me in the doorway, he nodded slightly, our signal that everything had gone according to plan. Miles? Lena's voice cracked when she spotted me. What are you doing here? Documenting the truth, I said, raising my camera and taking a photo of her standing there with stolen files on the computer screen behind her. Say cheese. The next few hours were a blur of police stations, lawyers, and paperwork. Lena was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and computer crimes. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just from our sting operation, but from the weeks of investigation that had preceded it. The other photographers whose work she'd stolen were there to file their own complaints. Gallery owners who'd been scammed provided testimony about her methods and the false documents she'd used. Cedric's company presented evidence of her attempts to access confidential client information. By evening, Lena was in custody, and I was sitting in my studio, finally able to process what had happened. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed Lena's number, which confused me until I realized she must have been allowed to make a call from jail. Miles, she said when I answered, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Please, I need help. You need a lawyer, I said. I need someone who understands me, someone who knows I'm not a bad person. She was crying now. This whole thing got out of hand. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? The fraud, the manipulation, or the attempted corporate espionage? I was desperate, okay? I felt trapped in our relationship, trapped in my life. I just wanted options. So you decided to create options by stealing from me and lying to Cedric. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could build something better for both of us. I was quiet for a moment, listening to her cry. Part of me, a very small part, felt sorry for her. But a larger part remembered the gallery owners she'd cheated, the other photographers whose work she'd stolen, the clients whose private information she'd tried to access. Lena, I said finally, you told me that Cedric was your soulmate, and I was just convenient. Do you remember that? Yes, she whispered. Well, conveniently, you're no longer my problem. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from unknown numbers, probably reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. A photographer's girlfriend arrested for running an elaborate art fraud scheme while attempting to steal financial information from a private equity firm. It had all the elements of a perfect scandal. I made coffee and sat in my studio, surrounded by my cameras and my prints and the quiet satisfaction of work I loved. For the first time in months, the space felt entirely mine again. My computer chimed with an email notification. The sender was Charlie from the gallery. Miles, it read, heard about what happened with Lena. I wanted you to know. The art community is rallying around you and the other photographers who were affected. We're organizing a show to benefit the galleries that lost money to her scheme. Would you be interested in participating? I smiled and started typing my response. Yes, I was very interested in participating. Outside my window, Boston was waking up to a new day. Somewhere across the city, Lena was probably waking up in a jail cell, finally facing the consequences of her choices. And me? I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I loved, with exactly the kind of future I wanted.